Let's take a little closer look at this stream and the water here. I'm sure you're seeing that this water doesn't really look too incredibly healthy. That would be a bit of a concern, if you're looking at the water and it's like, I don't know that I would want to drink this water. In fact, I'm not sure I even want to touch it. So to understand a little bit more about that in water and urban interfaces, it's important to understand some things about what happens in our yards and in our sidewalks and things about talking about controlling litter and other things. When people fertilize their lawns and throw a lot of fertilizer on their grass, and then it rains or the sprinklers are on and then it washes it down into the street, it eventually wanders into the stream. And when that happens, what happens is that the nitrogen that's designed to make your lawn green grows a lot of algae inside the water, which you can see here. And then what happens is that we get a little bit of a situation going on where the water becomes toxic for fish and other kinds of things because it's just too much nitrogen in it. I've actually tested this water before. I haven't done it lately, but I did it before, and I found that it had too much nitrogen in it and that it wasn't something that would be safe for fish to live in, for example. So that's something of concern. The other thing is like people always say, when you walk your dog and the dog does a poo, you better pick it up. And one of the reasons for that is that if you don't, when it rains, it will wash into the creek. And then we have the same sort of thing happening. And that is that we get a nitrogen load going on in the creek. And that causes problems with the algae again and makes the water toxic for everything. So ideally, what we want to do is to keep the water clean. The way we do that is we don't use too much fertilizer on our grass, and we don't overwater our grass so it washes into the street. When we walk our dogs, we pick up after them. If we litter or something, we lose paper or something, we pick it up so that we don't have that flowing into the stream. Because once we have that going on, then it gets down here and it flows into the streams. As we continue our walk here, we are seeing a tree we haven't seen before. Let's have a look at this one. So this is kind of neat. This is a nice big cottonwood tree, and it's pretty big. It goes from the creek and starts heading up here. It's a big one. It looks like, wow, is this an oak tree? No, clearly the leaves are different, and it's not a sycamore tree. So we had to learn a little bit more about it. So best way to learn about a tree is by looking at its leaves, and we kind of see that this is not either a sycamore, and it's not an oak. So this is what we call a Fremont cottonwood tree. And this tree it's a native tree, lives in California, lives in other places around California also. And then growing over here, let's see what we've got going over here. So this is an interesting big giant shrub or bush. And it's got some dried flowers on it, got an interesting leaf. And this is what we call mule fat. So I'm not sure why it's named that, but it's called mule fat. And it's native here to California. It likes living near the stream beds. And then across the creek bed, there's a very big tree again growing. And what's interesting about this one, see if we can zoom in on it again. This is one you've seen before. Maybe some of you recognize the leaves of it. So if you do, then you recognize it as being the red willow, but this is what they turn into. So pretty good sized trees, as you can see. Again, living very close to the stream bed so that we know that its roots are going into the water. So you wouldn't find red willows living in the middle of the hills, for example. So as I'm walking along, I see this weed that's growing here, which looks kind of interesting. It's getting my interest going. It's starting to bloom now. This is western ragweed, and this is something that if you have allergies, that people are often allergic to. And if your allergies get worse in the fall, like now, it could be this that you're allergic to. Now, what's interesting about it, and we can learn something from this, and that is it's blooming now in November. Now, most plants that you understand they probably bloom in the spring. But California native plants like to bloom in the fall. And the reason for that is that tomorrow it's supposed to rain, for example, the first time in many months. And so they know that they're evolved or adapted to living in a situation where it rains in the winter, and that's when they can grow. And they also know that after the spring passes, there isn't going to be any rain for 6 to 9 months. So if you were a plant and you were going to put out seeds, you wouldn't want to put them out at a time when they're not going to get watered by nature. So the western ragweed and a lot of the plants that we see are blooming now in the fall, which is kind of cool. And that's typical of plants in what we call a Mediterranean climate. And the Mediterranean climate can be found obviously in the Mediterranean, like in Italy and Spain and places like that. It's also found in Chile. It's also found in Western Australia and in South Africa, but not a lot of other places. So that's what's a cool thing about living in Southern California. Now I'm looking over here down into the creek bed again, and I'm seeing one of our old friends, which is the giant invasive fan palm. Again, that shouldn't be here. The high school sometimes and working with the Parks Department comes through here and tries to dig these out so that they don't continue to spread themselves around the creek. Now here's something fun that you may not know about. This is another little shrub that you would normally just pass by and not think much about, but it is also blooming in the fall, and this is called tumbleweed. And you may have seen tumbleweeds before, and they're a native plant here in Southern California, and they're really cool. They're not really just a nuisance when they get big and then they die and the wind blows them. They're really kind of a neat plant, as you can see. They're very beautiful when they're green and make a very pretty flower like that. Now here's a plant we haven't seen yet, and it's kind of interesting. It's very green. It's got some neat flowers on it. Again, how cool to be seeing these beautiful flowers blooming this time of the year. And this is called coyote brush or coyote bush. So it's neat that we have a plant that's named after an animal that we see around Oak Park quite a bit. And this is a native in this area. It grows in a wider range too, not just in California. But it is something that if you're walking around, you could see and you can identify, oh, that's coyote brush. Now here's another tree we haven't seen yet, and it is beautiful. Look at the blooms all over it. Let's get a close-up of some of these. Very green. Even the stems are green. So you can't miss this one because of the beautiful yellow flowers this time of the year. It's got a beautiful, healthy green foliage. And this is called tree tobacco. Now this is actually related to real tobacco, like they make cigarettes out of. But I don't think you can smoke this. But it is interesting that it's a wild form of native tobacco that lives here in California. It's not invasive, so it's an actual plant that lives in California. It's really pretty. Matter of fact, there's a bird up here that likes living in it. Let's have a look at the bird. Oh, I think the bird has flown away. But as you can see, there are certain types of birds that are attracted to these flowers. And maybe the insects that live around here. So guaranteed, if you go for a walk along the creek, you're going to find this tree tobacco. Now this is an unusual looking plant here. And you can just sort of already tell by looking at it that this is not a native plant, that this probably doesn't belong here. This is castor bean, and it is an invasive plant that get loose. And you may have heard of castor oil. It's a crop, and it's gotten loose here in the wildland in Oak Park and all over Southern California. So you can see these grown kind of everywhere. And they are a Mediterranean plant. You can see that by the fact that it's blooming right now in November. Very unusual. So very happy to be living here. And it doesn't even need a lot of water. This one's pretty far from the creek. So it's can live almost without any water at all, which is pretty amazing.